next reader is Jen Ladino. Jen Ladino is an associate professor of English at UI who specializes in American literature and the environment. She has published on a range of authors and topics, including Wallace Stegner's use of frontier rhetoric, Sherman Alexie's animal poetry, Marianne Moore's collage poem about Mount Rainier, the films Grizzly Man and March of the Penguins, and Maya Lin's memorial website, What is Missing. Her first book, Reclaiming Nostalgia, Longing for Nature in American Literature, was a finalist for the Asley Book Award in 2013, and her writing has been described as graceful and athletic. She is currently at work on her second monograph, Memorials Matter, Affect and Environment at American Memory Sites, a project that examines how natural and built environments and National Park Service memorials in the American West impact visitors' emotions. She's traveled to South Dakota, Hawaii, California, and Colorado so far, with trips to Arizona, Utah, and Washington on the calendar. She'll read to us today from the chapter on the Manzanar National Historic Site in the Owens Valley. The title of the work she is reading from tonight is Mountains, Monuments, and Other Matter, Environmental Affects at Manzanar. So please welcome Jen Ladino. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for inviting me to be here and for being here tonight. It's a dream team of authors, and I'm honored to be on the lineup tonight. As Jennifer said, this has been a really fun project to research, partly because I've been able to travel to some really cool places, including places like Pearl Harbor and the Sand Creek Massacre site in Colorado, as well as Mount Rushmore with my now 8-year-old son. That was a treat. And I'm trying to get a handle on how emotions circulate at these sites and how tourists experience emotions at the sites, sometimes alongside and sometimes independently from the narratives that we're told about them and that are written down on the Park Service displays. I'm also really interested in how the diverse landscapes at these different sites shape the emotions of visitors. It's also been a fun project for me to write and sort of challenging because I'm trying to combine a pretty heavy theoretical component, which I'll spare you tonight, don't worry. We're not going to get that part. And then a sort of personal sort of narrative scholarship, what we in eco-criticism call narrative scholarship, which is my first foray into that. So I hope you enjoy it. When I arrive at Manzanar in June of 2014, the first thing that strikes me is a guard tower, its large searchlight pointed right at the entrance road. Even without armed gunmen, the tower carries associations of war, machine guns, and Nazi concentration camps. With its incongruous linear symmetry, its tone is threatening and cold. It feels unnatural against the textured Owens Valley landscapes. The Alabama hills, odd rock formations reminding me of seaside drip castles I made as a child and carrying connotations of Southern pride and Western film history. The familiar tufts of pastel green against the rust-brown ground of the sagebrush flats, and the dominant Sierra Nevada, where snowfields dot Mount Williamson and other majestic pinnacles tower thousands of feet above the valley. I am relieved not to be greeted like 7-year-old child Jean Wakatsuki Houston was, and she's the author of Farewell to Manzanar. Some of you might know that book. When she arrived at Manzanar in 1942, she was greeted by a billowing flurry of dust and sand, although even this early summer day is threatening to be a hot one. The Owens Valley is arguably a beautiful place, if not an especially comfortable one. Like Houston, many incarcerees recall the extreme temperatures. The valley often tops 100 degrees in summer and drops below freezing in winter, and the persistent wind that swept sand into bunkhouses, mess halls, and bodily crevices. The valley's history is as hostile as its environment. Los Angeles began acquiring water rights to the Owens Valley in 1905 and has since siphoned its water, draining Owens Lake, creating epic dust pollution, and displacing the farmers and ranchers who were making a living there. But these were only the most recently displaced people. The region was originally home to Paiutes who were forcibly displaced when prospectors and miners, then ranchers, farmers, and orchardists, people who'd come to seek their fortunes in apples, settled the area. By 1930, all these settlers had sold their water rights to LA and left the valley. Their livelihood evaporated with the water. This is a classic Western story. Indigenous people pushed out by white settlers, an effort to turn a frontier into a garden, a political battle over water rights, an urban center sucking resources from small towns. Today, the valley's recreational draw obscures its history of displacement, much the way the dozens of Western films shot in the Alabama hills and the celebration of those films in the nearby town of Lone Pine gloss the troubling conflicts of the Old West. Valley feels vast and cinematic enough to accommodate all of these histories. It is a liminal place between the lowest and highest points in the contiguous U.S., Death Valley's Badwater Basin at negative 282 feet, and Mount Whitney at 14.5. Mount Whitney isn't visible from Manzanar, though I spotted it the previous evening when I drove from Las Vegas through Death Valley to Lone Pine, which Houston describes as the small tree-filled town where a lot of mountain buffs turn off for the Mount Whitney portal. A 13-year seasonal ranger in Great Teton National Park and longtime mountain buff myself, I feel the peaks beckoning with the promise of visual and bodily rewards, dramatic views, heightened senses, and access to water. On this trip, though, I'm here to interpret the mountains, not to play in them. A scholar-visitor embarking on a grant-funded research project and with no familial connection to the incarceration experience myself, I am hyper-aware of my outsider status. I am what scholar Sarah Ahmed calls an affect alien, bringing an inappropriate love for mountains to this site of shame. And yet my personal associations with mountains with freedom, mobility, and the opportunity to reach a summit are not unique. They are also cultural, shared by many other white, economically secure, able-bodied Americans and promoted by dominant versions of Western history. Perhaps I'm not an affect alien, but an embodiment of the implied tourist, very demographic, addressed by the site. One thing is clear, these associations with mountains are in tension with the barbed wire enclosing this memorial. I would soon discover other similar ironies conveyed by the environment itself. And that's sort of what this chapter is about. I'll just tell you about one of them. I stopped at the old baseball fields to read a display with the lighthearted title, "Play Ball!" which claims this symbol of an American way of life boosted morale in camp. As I am imagining the cheering, smiling faces on this field with the help of a historic photo on display, I glance up and see the reconstructed guard tower lurking just to the east. This quintessential American sport, with its connotations of democracy and freedom, was played in the shadow of armed guards, guards with guns pointed inside the camp. Part of the irony is generated by the narrative, the facile suggestion that a sport could boost morale in a prison setting. But one also feels the irony in a more bodily sense. The morale-building field juxtaposed with the fear-inducing tower makes a paradoxical, ironic, affective impression, a corporeal impression that comes from being in this fraught environment. Complicating things further, 100 degrees opposite the guard tower are the Sierra Nevada, which either loom or beckon, depending who's looking. For me, their promise of adventure, exploration, and mobility generates more affective dissonance, which is my phrase for a kind of felt irony or a competing affect, two competing affects. As Mount Williamson's alluring affect confronts the guard tower's threatening one. For some incarcerees, and I imagine for their descendants who visit today, the landscape tone is quite different. It's ominous and daunting like the towers. The mountain range echoes and compounds the confinement of the built environment, adding a natural reinforcement to the government-sponsored perimeter. Houston writes, for instance, about a night outside the fence for a school-sponsored camping trip, after which she concludes, lovely as they were to look at, the Sierras were frightening to think about, an icy barricade. Quite unlike the sense of adventure or risk that today's recreationalists seek in the mountains, she felt more secure inside the barbed wire. So from here, I go on to sort of eavesdrop on a park ranger's guided tour, where she's telling a group of high school students to stand on top of what were once the latrines and see how close together they were. So you have this group of students very awkwardly huddled together on these latrines. So that was fun, and then I encounter some lizards and rusted tin can lids and origami cranes and all sorts of things on site as I wander around. And I end up in the cemetery memorial, which is the obelisk that Ansel Adams has made famous. Some of you might know it, looking at a 2-month-old baby's gravesite, which was one of the more poignant moments of the day. And at each of those sites and in each of these sort of emotional moments, I try to say something about how the physical matter, whether it's the landscape, the obelisk, the tin can lids, or whatever, or a baby's toothbrush put at the base of the obelisk, can comfort or unsettle us, provide geologic perspective, incite things like distress, shame, anger, or compassion, and confront us with the transience of all lives. The bigger goal of the project is to suggest then that all environments are affective or emotional in some sense, and that we benefit from learning how to talk about those emotions in clearer and more nuanced ways. Thanks.